Hello, fellow crime detectives. Welcome to an all-new episode of On the Case with me, Detective Alex Cardinale. How are you guys and gals doing today? Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of On the Case with me, Detective Alex Cardinale. You know, on our past cases, I've talked about shootings and I've talked about stabbings, but today's crime is definitely unorthodox. It's definitely very sick, and honestly, it can be unheard of. It's not talked about often, but social media can be damaging to a person. Attention from social media can drive a person to do sick things. And that's what today's case centers around. Mrs. Lacey Spears thrived on attention and sympathy she got on social media because her son was constantly sick and ill. But Lacey was the reason her son was sick and ill, and Lacey was the reason why Garnett passed away. Today's crime case is very sad. It's about a mother who poisoned her own son for attention and sympathy and killed her son. She had poisoned him so bad that his sodium levels skyrocketed. His brain basically swelled. He went brain dead before passing away. This poor 5-year-old boy suffered at the hands of a woman who was looking for attention and sympathy on social media. Very, very sick. And it makes me sick to my stomach that there are people out here like Lacey Spears. Now, Lacey does suffer from a condition which we're going to talk about on today's show. It is a very rare condition, and it is known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. We'll talk about Munchausen syndrome by proxy a little bit later on in the show. So today's crime, I am going to talk about the Lacey Spears case and the murder of 5-year-old Garnett Spears. This case definitely rocked America because it put into perspective that there are sick parents out there that will lie to the medical system and try to get attention. So before we break this case open, what are your thoughts on this case? Post them in the comments below. So whether you're watching this video live or you're catching the replay of this video, please post your thoughts on this case in the comments. I would like to know what your thoughts are about this horrific case. All right, having said that, let's get this case started. And here is what to know about this crime case. This crime case simply involves a mother and a son. So it involves a sick boy and an even sicker, mentally ill mother. And the reason why her boy is sick is because of the mother. So let's take a look at a picture of Lacey Spears and her son, Garnett Spears. Actually, I don't have any pictures of them together, but I have a picture of Garnett and Lacey that I'm going to show you. Now, Lacey and Garnett do have pictures together where Lacey is under the impression that she is a loving mother, but that is far from the case. So let's learn about the poor victim. The victim is 5-year-old Garnett Spears, and this is the victim in this case. a precious young boy, only 5 years of age, had his life tragically taken from him. Again, this is another picture of the victim, the murder victim, Garnett Spears, a helpless little boy murdered by his own mother. Now, a mother is supposed to be your protector and not your murderer. Very, very sad. So, the victim, Garnett Spears. Garnett was a 5-year-old boy who died from sodium poisoning after his mother, Lacey Spears, put salt in his feeding tube. It led to swelling in his brain. Eventually, his brain went dead, and then he passed away, sadly. Now, when Garnett was 8 months old, Lacey asked to have a feeding tube put in him because she said he was a failure to thrive child. So at 8 months old, the medical issues begin, and Lacey has a feeding tube put into Garnett because she alleges that Garnett was not eating and was a failure to thrive child. Now, Garnett also had another procedure to close up his throat so he couldn't regurgitate or be sick. And that is horrific. That is vile. And it is very, very shocking, to say the least. I think this was deliberate. I think Lacey knew that if Garnett could not puke up the sodium, eventually it would be the end of Garnett. Very, very sad. Garnett is fed through a tube and is no longer able to throw up. His little body is forced to ingest everything his mother is feeding him. And unfortunately, that meant that he was ingesting all that sodium from the table salt. Now, at age 4, doctors said his feeding tube was no longer needed as he was eating like a normal kid. But Lacey said it must stay. Garnett had been poisoned with the salt from his infancy to his death at 5 years old. Garnett had spent much of his life hospitalized. He has seen over 20 doctors, and he has spent most of his life hospitalized. How sick. And the mother is to blame for this tragedy. So that's the victim. Let's learn about the perpetrator. And here is a image of Lacey Spears the day she went on trial. And she looks to be playing emotions really well, but downright she is a child murderer. Here's another image of Lacey Spears trying to plead her case as an innocent mother, but deep down she is a psychopath, she is an attention whore, and a murderer. So let's learn about Lacey Spears right now. So Lacey Spears was born and raised in Alabama, where she lived until she gave birth to Garnett and became a single mother. She always wanted to be looking after children, and when she left school, she went into childcare. And when she started taking care of children, people would notice how much more time she would spend with the children than everyone else. According to reports, Lacey felt lonely in Alabama, so she moved in with her maternal grandmother in Florida for a brief while before relocating to a community called the Fellowship in Chestnut Ridge, New York. While there, Lacey told people that Garnett was the son of a police officer who had lost his life in a car crash. But the actual reality was much different. Garnett's biological father was a former friend of Lacey's, Chris Hill, who had allegedly wanted to be a part of his son's life but wasn't allowed to. And as it soon came to light, Lacey had a history of lying. She faked illnesses, pretended other children were her own, and even went as far as to force Garnett to suffer repeated hospitalizations from a young age. For the latter, the single mother also took to social media platforms and created a blog to share updates on her son's health, leading her to be nicknamed the Mommy Blogger. Lacey loved getting sympathy and attention online. She was willing to make her own son suffer to get it. So for the 5 years Garnett was born, he was living in pure hell under a mentally ill mother. I feel very sad for Garnett, and hopefully he is resting in peace. So let's learn about the murder of Garnett Spears and the crime that was committed. So it happened on a weekend. Garnett had symptoms of a high fever, a severe headache, and convulsions. Lacey rushes Garnett to the hospital, and this was on a Friday night. The mother complained that Garnett was having seizures. They hooked him up to an EEG. The first day, there is no seizure, and there's no seizure activity on Saturday or Sunday. According to the medical staff, 5-year-old Garnett is the picture of health. Sunday morning, the nurse comes in with some great news for Lacey that Garnett had no seizure activity. He would most likely be going home. And that drove Lacey nuts. This is where she committed the crime. It was that Sunday morning when the nurses told Lacey Garnett was perfectly healthy and he would be going home. Minutes later, Lacey and Garnett are seen recorded on camera heading to the bathroom. Lacey is seen carrying a feeding tube in a feeding bag. In the bathroom, Lacey put a lethal amount of sodium, aka table salt, in Garnett's feeding tube. Because of the tube in his stomach, he had no choice but to intake the sodium, and he could not throw up. How evil. Garnett returned to the hospital bed in pain, trying to throw up, but he physically couldn't. This poor boy was suffering in pain at the hands of his mother. His brain had swelled. Eventually, he went brain dead. He suffered, and eventually he passed away. Lacey posted everything on Facebook, getting the sympathy and attention that she wanted. Garnett was essentially brain dead. Doctors treating Garnett can't find a medical explanation for his current grave condition. Alarmed by the suspicious circumstances, they called the police. Blood tests showed that Garnett had a lethal amount of sodium in his system. But how in the world did it get there? Not naturally, according to doctors. Right away, Lacey is interviewed by police. She spoke pretty well. She had a pretty good working knowledge of hospital terms and illnesses, said the detective that interviewed her. At the exact moment, I had no reason not to believe what she was telling me, said Carfi, the detective that interviewed her. According to investigators, they had to wonder if this was simply a tragic story of a young mother who had just lost her sick child. Detectives had to consider that maybe the doctors got it wrong. During the same interview with Detective Carfi, Lacey mentions the recent passing of Garnett's father, Blake. Around this same time, Lacey's own father arrives at the hospital. Detective Carfey learns that whoever Blake is, he is not dead and he is not Garnett's father. Blake Robinson is alive and well and working as a Morgan County Sheriff's deputy in Alabama. Police say Robinson did not know Lacey was using pictures of him or using him in her story until he was told by Carfey. Robinson tells police he went out on a couple of dates with Lacey, but nothing serious or sexual. For me, that was the biggest red flag to Lacey's truthfulness, said Detective Carfey. Investigators wonder if she lied about Garnett's father, what else might she be lying about? Police obtained a search warrant for Lacey's apartment. When we walked in there, there was an open setting kind of apartment, and in the middle of it was a feeding machine pump that appeared to be breast milk in the feeding bag, said Detective Dunn. There was a small table off to the side. It had all the medications that she had told us. There was like 7 or 8 medications that she had told Detective Carfey that she was currently giving her son lined up on the table, and in the middle of those was a sea salt container. Police photographed the apartment. Then they receive a game-changing phone call. It's shocking information coming from Lacey's neighbor, Valerie Pluchet. She tells police Lacey called her to ask her to go to her apartment, retrieve the feeding bag, get rid of it, and don't tell anybody about it. Detectives recover the feeding bag and a second bag from the trash. They were submitted to the Westchester County lab for analysis, and the astronomically high level of sodium was found in those bags, said Detective Budnick. Police collected 170 items from Lacey's apartment, and they questioned her again. Investigators start digging and discovered dozens of records from Child Protective Services and doctor offices from Alabama and Florida. Detectives begin to see a pattern of what they believe to be child abuse in one of the rarest forms, Munchausen by proxy syndrome. Investigators start to build their case, believing Lacey was poisoning her son and then posting it all over social media to grab attention and sympathy. It's like she was erotic for attention and sympathy. Though she and her lawyers deny Lacey Spears suffers from any mental disorder, Lacey seems to be the poster child for Munchausen by proxy. But how did she get away with this for so long? If someone were to catch on to her or they would try to investigate her, she moved to another state. She knew how to play the system. When Child Protective Services in Alabama and Florida were both investigating her, she would move. She knew that when it was getting too hot for her to be there, it was time to move, said Detective Dunn. But the buck stops in New York. Now investigators just need solid proof, more than just tainted feeding bags and a canister of salt. If only cops could catch Lacey red-handed, or perhaps they already have. New York investigators suspect Lacey Spears has just killed her own 5-year-old son. The boy died just hours after doctors in the hospital gave him a clean bill of health. Cops claim Lacey poisoned her son, Garnett, to death with lethal levels of salt. The final moments of Garnett's young life were captured on video on January 19, 2014. The video begins when Garnett checks in on Friday at the hospital, and it records through Sunday when doctors and nurses tell Lacey that Garnett is healthy enough to go home. After medical personnel leave the room, Lacey appears to take Garnett to the bathroom just outside of camera range. And this is where it gets sick, and I feel so bad for the kid. When he came back out of that bathroom, a few seconds or minutes, he turned into the most sick child, burying his head into the pillow, turning, retching. He was trying to throw up, but we already know that he couldn't throw up because at 9 months old, he had an operation that kept him from throwing up, said Detective Dunn. Lacey is arrested and charged with murder. Lacey's defense team argued she didn't poison her son with salt, and in fact, there was no sodium recovered from the feeding bags in his hospital room. But in court, prosecutors slowed down that video to show what appears to be a feeding tube and some substance in Lacey's hands when she returned from the bathroom with her 5-year-old son. Prosecutors claimed that just off camera in the bathroom, Lacey gave Garnett a lethal dose of salt, which moments later caused his brain to swell and ultimately killed him. And I believe this was done so that she can gather sympathy and attention from social media and her blog post, and thousands of people would begin sending in their condolences for the loss of her son. But there's more. The videotape evidence also shows Lacey on her phone doing Google searches. She had been on the phone laying in the bed, and we observed that some of those searches were salt poisoning, said Detective Dunn. We can connect the time of the phone to the video and the search that she was doing. Lacey Spears was found guilty of depraved indifference murder of a child and was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. When Garnett passed away, his real father, Chris Hill, was devastated and posted a message in part on his Facebook page. I cried for hours when I found this out, and it will continue to hurt till the day I die. How very, very sad. I feel bad for Mr. Chris Hill, who lost his biological son. And Lacey did not allow Chris Hill to see his son for a while, a very, very sick individual. So detectives say that during their 6-month investigation, they were deathly afraid that Lacey might be trying to get pregnant again, that some of her online chatter was about trying to have another child. But thankfully, she was arrested before that could happen, and Lacey Spears was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. So may Lacey Spears rot in hell and rot in prison for what she made her son, Garnett Spears, go through. I hope those 20 years to life in prison are complete, utter hell for Lacey. I hope somebody puts a lot of sodium in her body and she suffers the way that Garnett did. Some people should not have children because they are not fit parents, and that is what Lacey is, a mentally ill individual who should have kept her legs closed and never had a child. So now let's talk about my thoughts on this case. You know, this is a really sad and horrific case. This poor child, Garnett Spears, was only 5 years old when he was killed. But the 5 years he had on this earth was complete and utter misery and hell. This child suffered numerous unneeded, unnecessary surgeries, and then to be poisoned with salt. And salt is deadly, folks. Sodium in high numbers is deadly. It can shut down body organs. It can cause brain death, which happened with Garnett. And over time, it can ruin a person's body, and that's what it did. I don't understand why posting about a sick child on social media can get someone so excited. I don't understand why she wanted attention from social media and why sympathy and attention was a factor in this. If she wanted attention on social media, do what I'm doing. Host a YouTube channel, host a podcast, host a Facebook group. Don't commit murder. Don't torture a 5-year-old boy and lie about it. It is very, very sick. Lacey Spears is a sick individual, and I hope karma comes back to bite her in the ass. What she did to this 5-year-old boy is unforgivable, in my opinion. And some people may say, oh, she has a mental disorder known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But any mental order or any mental disorder or mental illness does not, and again, I repeat, does not constitute it being okay to commit a horrific crime. I think Lacey should have gotten more than 20 years to life. That poor boy suffered for 5 years. That is a long time to suffer with sodium poisoning. And let's not to mention there's no need for the feeding tube or the other tube that prevented him from regurgitating or puking up. Very, very sad case. And again, this is an example that not everybody is fit to be parents. Parents murder their kids all the time, and this is just an example of people who are immature should keep their dicks and their vaginas away from each other if they cannot handle being a parent or if they're mentally ill. And there's going to be other crime cases that involve a parent murdering a kid, and it's just as sad. So, those are my thoughts on this crime. The last thing I have to talk about today is the disease that Lacey Spears has. What is Munchausen syndrome by proxy? Let's find out. Well, Munchausen proxy syndrome is a serious mental disorder in which someone deceives others by appearing sick, by purposely getting sick, or by self-injury. It is a factious disorder, and it can also happen when family members or caregivers falsely present others, such as children, as being ill, injured, or impaired. And that is what Lacey did with Garnett. Symptoms can range from mild, slight exaggeration of symptoms, to severe. The person may make up symptoms or even tamper with medical tests to convince others that treatment, such as high-risk surgery, is needed. And that is what Lacey did. She tampered with evidence. She convinced doctors to put a feeding tube in Garnett. And for so many years, she got away with poisoning Garnett just to go to another hospital, the next doctor, and it is very, very sick. So now that we know the symptoms of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, keep an eye on a parent that worries so much about a child's health that they constantly go to the doctors because they can end up being the next Lacey Spears. Very, very tragic and awful crime. I learned about this crime on Web of Lies, and when I came up with the idea of doing a crime show, this is one of the crimes that I wanted to talk about. But I wanted to make sure I did it after the holidays, after Christmas, because children look forward to Christmas and they love Christmas. And I wish Garnett would have been here to celebrate his Christmas. All right, guys, that is this week's crime case, a very sad case. Please post your thoughts on this crime in the comments below. Next week's crime case gets even weirder. Next week on the Case with Detective Alex Cardinale, I am going to talk about the sextortion of Professor James Ani. Now, James Ani was a beloved professor, but he got caught up in an extortion scheme that was committed by a 33-year-old man. It involved a female transvestite teenager. And feeling embarrassed and perhaps betrayed and perhaps feeling embarrassment for his family, James Ani opted to commit suicide after not coming up with the ransom. So we're going to learn about the extortion of Professor James Ani, Monday, April 18th, 2022, live at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, right here on my YouTube channel, the legendary Alex Cardinale. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, the legendary Alex Cardinale, for all future crime cases, cooking and baking videos, aquarium videos, and more. Stay safe, everybody. Make sure you don't commit a crime, and happy Easter. I will see you next Monday for the next installment of Detective Alex Cardinale. Peace out, and if you see something, say something. Always report a crime. Have a great week, everybody. Happy Easter from me, Easter Bunny Alex Cardinale. I, Easter Bunny Alex Cardinale, will be hosting the inaugural Easter 2022 Bash, which will be airing right here on this YouTube channel Saturday, April 16th, 2022 at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. Just one day before Easter, join me, Easter Bunny Alex Cardinale, for a special Easter Bash. The very first one to be hosted by Easter Bunny Alex Cardinale. Easter Bunny is proud to announce there will be Easter appearances by Aqua Alex Cardinale and Chef Alex Cardinale. Chef Alex is going to make one of my favorite treats. Chef Alex will show you how to make honey roasted carrots, and he will make one awesome Easter dessert, and Chef Alex will give tips for hosting a delicious Easter dinner. Now, I'm a bunny, but I love tropical fish. So I've called upon Aqua Alex to be on the Easter 2022 Bash. Aqua Alex will discuss Easter-themed aquarium fish, and he will discuss the saltwater rabbit fish, aka fox faces and the spotted rabbit fish. And Aqua Alex will discuss treats that I could give their fish as Easter Bunny Alex Cardinale. Now, I, Easter Bunny Alex Cardinale, will discuss my favorite Easter memories. I will have a message for people of all ages. I'll discuss the true meaning of Easter, and I may enjoy some Easter candy with all of you. It's going to be a fun time. Legendary Alex Cardinale is going to join me to paint some Easter eggs. So what will we paint the Easter eggs? You got to tune in to find out. Happy Easter, everybody. I hope you enjoy the Easter season, and most importantly, I hope you'll tune in to the Easter 2022 Bash, live Saturday, April 16th, 2022, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, exclusively on my YouTube channel, the legendary Alex Cardinale. Happy Easter, and go get those Easter candies.